The River Stour flows between Suffolk and Essex, with the portion between Sudbury and Flatford known as the Stour Valley, countryside area of outstanding natural beauty. The river gave inspiration to three gifted painters, John Constable, Thomas Gainsborough and Alfred Munnings. John Constable was born at East Bergholt on the 11th of June 1776 to Golding and Anne Constable. Their home was a fine mansion, but it's been long since demolished. Golding Constable was a prosperous corn merchant, owning the watermill at Flatford, and being on the Stour estuary it was convenient for transporting his product to London. Young John would walk every day across the fields on his way into Dedham, passing over the river at Fen Bridge. He was a pupil at Dedham Grammar School. The fine building still stands, but no longer a school. Some of the boys carved their initials into the brickwork, but there is no sign of a JC. John's interest was sketching with pad and pencil. He spent much of his time out in the countryside and became accomplished in this form of art. Golding Constable bought another mill at Dedham, hoping John would join him in the milling business, but his son's interest rested on being a painter. In 1816 John married Maria Bicknell, who was a granddaughter of the rector at the East Bergholt Church. The family chart shows that John and Maria had 7 children. Later John was elected as an associate of the Royal Academy. He sold his first canvas, The White Horse, followed by The Leaping Horse and The Cornfield, all scenes painted around Flatford. John continued with his painting, this one of the old chain pier at Brighton, and he lectured at the Academy until he died at the age of 60. He was buried at High Hampstead. And how is John Constable remembered in the Stour Valley today? At St Mary's Church in East Bergholt there is a window on the south aisle erected in his memory. The top panel depicts Christ's Ascension, and the rear centre panel shows Mary and her son having their portrait painted. Very appropriate. Also in the church is a copy of the parish register recording John's birth in 1776. At one time John had a studio in a cottage in Bergholt. The Church of St Mary the Virgin in Dedham remembers Constable by displaying his painting The Ascension, one of his religious works from an early date. Moving on to Flatford, the scene has changed little over the years. Now most of the area is owned by the National Trust. Bridge Cottage stands beside the river and contains a small exhibition of Constable's life and work, mostly reproductions of his paintings. A horse pulling a barge away from the mill. Stour Valley with Dedham Church in the distance. Flatford Lock as painted by Constable. The lock gates in situ having recently been restored. A dry dock where barges came in for repair, now being restored, was captured on canvas by the painter. The mill pond in front of the miller's house and Willie Lott's cottage, the location for the most famous of all his paintings, the hay wain, captured on canvas in 1821. It's difficult to find a more peaceful setting than here at Flatford. The rowboat moves upstream, perhaps heading for Sudbury. The Suffolk market town of Sudbury is some 20 miles from Flatford, seen in this 1860 painting by Henry Bridgman. It's the hometown of Thomas Gainsborough. The River Stour runs through the town, particularly noticed at the low-lying land in front of the Mill Hotel. Sudbury is a town full of history, with lots of interesting buildings, some dating from Georgian days. In this street stands the house owned by John Gainsborough when his son Thomas was born here in 1727. Young Thomas was educated at Sudbury Grammar School. He left home aged 13 to study art in London under the great William Hogarth. In 1746 Thomas married Margaret Burr and they produced 2 daughters. One of his first paintings was oil on canvas of Mr. and Mrs. Andrews, members of the landed gentry. Now a member of the Royal Academy, Thomas moved to Bath and painted his best-known work, The Blue Boy. The identity of the youth is not known. Next came London, when Thomas began exhibiting portraits of well-known celebrities, including Queen Charlotte, the wife of George III. Controversial painting Diana and Acton, Thomas died in 1788. He was buried in the churchyard of St Anne's at Kew. Sudbury, 250 years on, a flourishing market town. And retaining much of the past with ancient buildings such as the former Friary. On the site of the former grammar school, a more modern building, now housing a residential home. The former home of Thomas Gainsborough now serves as a museum and art gallery in his memory. It has the largest collection of his works under one roof. Each room in the house displays much of his prized paintings and memorabilia. This oil on canvas is entitled A Pitmaster's Boy. Charity relieving stress. Because of his association with people in high places, one room displays several portraits. Lady Charlotte Acton. The portrait of the renowned Mrs. Siddons was later used as the introduction to Gainsborough pictures. The garden behind the house is well maintained and contains plants that were available in Gainsborough's lifetime, including a mulberry tree that he planted himself. Thomas Gainsborough's association with Sudbury is marked by the great statue of him standing on Market Hill. In North Suffolk by the River Waveney is the small village of Mendham, where Alfred Munnings was born in October 1878. John Munnings, Alfred's father, was miller and corn merchant, owning Mendham Mill. Alfred's interest in sketching started at age 9 when he penned a sketch of his mother's horse, Fanny. After schooling at Framlingham College, he went to Norwich School of Art to study the subject seriously. Subjects included a young maiden, his brother Charles, and a colour work, Old Man of Mendham. He accepted an apprenticeship with Page Brothers in Norwich, concentrating mainly on designing advertising posters. During the First World War, he served in France as an official war artist. After Alfred's first wife died, he married Violet McBride in 1920. She was a fine horsewoman. Inspired by gypsies, Alfred found his great interest was working with horses. In 1920 he bought Castle House at Dedham, and as an associate of the Royal Academy he continued with his paintings. September afternoon on the River Stour. A party of students on Tagg's Island. Does the subject really matter? And of course, horses. Alfred spent many hours working in his studio at Castle House. 1944 he was president of the RA and received a knighthood. Towards his final days he was still painting. He died in July 1959, aged 80, and his ashes were scattered at St Paul's Cathedral. And how is Alfred Munnings remembered today? Castle House is open as an art museum devoted to his life's work, and it's furnished as it would have been when he lived here. Occasionally classes are held in the garden for keen amateur painters to see if they can capture the Munnings style. With a gypsy caravan and horses in attendance, the artists get to work.
What to do?
You've got to put him back off there.
Back at Mendham, the Munnings name lives on as the name of the village pub. Having taken a brief look at the three Stour Valley painters, it's good to take home a souvenir of each one.